VR, as an industry on the whole, there's so many hard problems yet to be solved. It really is just an open book for research and science for years to come.
It's kind of like cars 100 years ago compared to cars of today. That whole time there's been massive innovation. So maybe in 100 years I won't want to be working on virtual reality because we'll have it perfect. But until we get there, it's going to be a very exciting, really fast-moving field.
Yeah. I doubt Palmer will ever get out of virtual reality.
I'll probably die first.
That's probably true.
Right now, the community is taking off. It's exploding. And we're all on this mission to transform gaming, entertainment, the way we interact with one another. Everybody's part of the revolution.
It's the most exciting thing in technology. There's no other place which lets you create new worlds.
I've been working on a lot of research problems in academia, tracking and object recognition for many years. But VR is pretty much the first time we really have a good reason to solve all these problems.
It's probably one of the most interesting fields in technology right now, and I think as designers you really want to be on the kind of cutting edge of where things are happening.
It's not often you get to define a grammar for something new.
Well, I think in many ways those obstacles are what's fun about developing for VR right now.
I love being in a new space, and it's just a new medium. It's fun to explore.
I want to be there. I want to be there day one. I want to be part of that.
Different people are going to pull different bits of magic out of this, and that brightens my day when I see a new application that does something novel or clever, and I think that was made possible by this. This is great, and I'm so happy I'm working on this.
I am very excited to be a part of something that is going to change the world, and I do believe that.
What really kind of impacts me about what we're doing here is how hard it would be for me to go back to making regular games. It's not possible.
It's amazing, amazing progress in crazy directions all over the place, but all really funneling towards this idea of consumer VR.
So I actually think that VR is maybe the most transformational technology of my lifetime. With every new technology, there are those people who see that it could possibly change the world, and that's who I think we have here today.
This isn't a team of 10 or 100. This is the team of over 100,000 people coming together to realize the dream of virtual reality.
I think we're all incredibly grateful for the impact the community's had on both Oculus and the Rift.
They're really committed to getting this right, which is something we really believe in too. And it's amazing to have been on this journey with all of these people, making virtual reality what it is today. And I know I say this all the time, but really, we're just getting started.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome CEO Oculus, Brendan Iribe.
Wow. Good morning, and welcome to the first Oculus Connect Developer Conference. It's awesome to see all of you out there. This is a really special moment, and this is a special day for everyone. Today, after just 2 short years of launching the Kickstarter, I truly believe that you will also join us in the belief that VR is finally ready. We have some very exciting things to tell you and show you. We're gathered at this time where we've thought about VR for decades. We've dreamed of VR. It's been in books and movies. If you're a sci-fi enthusiast, this is the Holy Grail. This is the thing that you've always imagined would finally happen. It's not 2030, it's not 2050, it's 2014. And today, it is happening. Virtual reality is here. Just let that sink in. We thought about flying cars, maybe hoverboards. We thought about virtual reality, and it's now here. There are more developers in the world creating virtual reality with dev kits than ever before. You guys, the community, made this happen. There's over 100,000 Rift developer kits shipped to more than 130 countries around the world. We launched 2 years ago. That's incredible. I never expected it to go this quickly. None of us did. Again, it's because of you guys. It's because of the dream of virtual reality and hardware and it being finally the time. Today, you and the VR community have an opportunity to come together and take VR to the next level. That's what this conference is all about. That's what today is all about. Now, I hope you have a lot of fun while you're doing this. We always pride ourselves and say at Oculus, while we're on this crazy journey, this amazing journey, one of the most important, if not the most important parts of it, is to have freaking fun. We're going out there, we're changing the world, we're realizing this dream. Let's enjoy it. Let's embrace it, and let's do it together as a community. We're not 10, we're not 100. We're literally over 100,000. I think it's 130,000 now in our developer forum. That's incredible. There's never been a hardware platform with that many developer kits. Together, we have a chance to create something really special. Something that will change the lives of the entire future of human race. It's going to be that impactful. It really is. I didn't believe it when we first started. I thought it was a neat science project by a 19-year-old. That was potentially one of the coolest experiences I've ever seen. But I didn't realize just how important this was going to be for the future. Think about it for a second. We've been looking at different realities, different fantasies on 2D surfaces for over 100 years. Whether it's books, film, photos, video games. We all love video games. But it's always a 2D surface, and you're trying to immerse yourself in. You're trying to believe that you're in that fantasy, in that world. Luckily, you look around and you're reminded, it's okay, I'm not really there. Until now. With virtual reality, when you put on the headset, and it's good enough, and you're going to see something very special today, when it's good enough, suddenly the back of your brain believes you're there. You now are reminding yourself, no, I'm not really there. It's a pretty amazing experience. You start fighting this. We went from trying to convince ourselves we're there to try to convince ourselves we're not there. So we're not all going to be running around Call of Duty. You don't really want to be in Call of Duty. You don't want bullets going by your head. I have a feeling we'd all be crunched down in a bunker, really scared. I know I would be. But that's what virtual reality can bring. It is truly amazing. Our mission is to transform gaming, entertainment, and the way we interact. We truly believe this will happen. And yes, it did start with games and gaming. And it is going to continue with games. Because virtual reality, for it to truly work, you have to create 2 virtual cameras that are in the exact place of your eyes. You have to trick the brain that you're there with all the movement. That's all built at the core in software in a 3D game engine. And it will continue to be. And it's us, the VR and gaming community, that are going to make that happen. To do this and to really get out there and connect 1 billion people, 2 billion people in VR, we see 2 categories, PC and mobile VR. These each have trade-offs, advantages and challenges. Today on PC, you get this awesome comfort and high fidelity, and you get the sense of presence, which is the magic of VR. Using features like positional tracking, high frame rates, low persistence, incredibly powerful GPUs, you can create unbelievable worlds. You can create believable worlds. Again, this is just the beginning. It's only been 2 years. Think about the beginning of PCs and 2 years after Steve and Bill brought PCs to the world. Think about where we are now with VR. The next few decades are going to be incredible. With mobile, the magic is accessibility, affordability, and ultimately portability. Not having that cable tethered to your head, yanking at your head, is an awesome feeling. It is an awesome experience. Being able to pass around a set of VR glasses or goggles to anybody in the audience, anybody in front of you, is awesome. Being able to just share it, being able to take it with you, throw it in a backpack. It is very unique. I was recently at a hackathon where I was able to take the mobile VR headset and just hand it around and let dozens of people try it in a room. People were blown away. They never expected it to be so good. And I never expected you to be able to do that so easily. It really is awesome. What Carmack and the team have pulled off on today's mobile hardware is nothing short of incredible. But again, now it's up to you guys to carry that forward and create the content and make it a reality. So long term, we do see these two categories continuing to converge, overlap, but ultimately complement each other. The cell phone is not replacing your laptop. It's complementing it, and you'll be using it for a lot of different services, just like mobile VR will continue to complement PC VR. We strongly believe it's important to lead in both, to do this right, and ultimately to connect billions of people in VR. When we launched Oculus, our prototypes were far from consumer ready. The early duct tape versions, hot glue, it was early days. We then added plastic, made it a little more comfortable, finally took it to China, built the DK1, shipped the DK1, slightly terrifying moment. Then we created the HD prototype, Crystal Cove, and finally DK2. On the mobile side, which started a little bit later, we got to skip duct tape, hot glue, and go right to 3D printing. We started with a holder, we glued our DK1 sensor on, and we started iterating as quick as we could. Started using a few other DK1 parts and realized that it was probably better to just go straight to a partnership with Samsung to really make this happen. It also became clear it needed some magic. Welcome Carmack to the picture. I never expected it to be so good. It really is pretty incredible. And now we have early prototypes of Gear VR, which you've heard. So today, we have DK2 on the PC, positional tracking, low persistence. It really delivers a great experience. It's not quite there yet, but it is very, very good. And it's a great place to start if you're creating content on the PC. We also have Samsung Gear VR Innovator Edition, which we recently announced on stage with Samsung in front of millions of people. Just think about that. 2 years after we launched a Kickstarter for an idea that pretty much never worked, one of the largest hardware companies in the world has announced it as an official product that they're going to be selling. A year or two from now, it'll be in every phone store out there. A little scary, but it's going to be you guys creating the content to make this happen. We're all in this together. We really are. This is a community. This is not 10 or 100. It is 100,000. And all of this started with the original Rift DK1 being kickstarted. I'm really excited about the announcement that Nirav made last night. We decided to give back to the community and fully open source the entire DK1. All the hardware design, firmware, tracker, the PCB. I can't wait to see all the Chinese knockoffs. God help us all. But we do believe this is important. It's important for the hackers and the makers out there to be able to pick this up, take that tracker, glue it on to different things. Take some source code, change it, modify it, ship it, make something awesome. All the source is on GitHub right now. Have fun, China. So as we look back at the history of how this all got started, it's just awesome. It really is. It's still kind of all surreal. I got a phone call in around June 2012 that I needed to meet this guy named Palmer Luckey. I thought, okay, Palmer Luckey. And they said, yeah, he's on to something awesome. It's virtual reality, and it's finally going to work. And I thought, VR's never worked. I'm too busy, I'm sorry. Then I looked up on the internet and saw some interesting news coming out of E3 and thought, okay, might as well go meet this Palmer Luckey. I wouldn't want to be the guy that misses the thing that changes the world. That would be bad. Pretty depressing. So we packed up, grabbed Michael Antonov and Nate Mitchell. We were all working together at the time. We drove up to LA, booked a nice restaurant, steakhouse, and invited Palmer Luckey to meet us for dinner. In walks Palmer Luckey in an Atari t-shirt, shorts, and these awesome flip-flops. My first thought is, wow, he's a lot younger than I expected. He looked like 16, 17 at the time. I think he was 19. And a slight concern over whether they'd actually even seat us. They did, luckily. We got talking, and we had this incredible evening, basically just listening to Palmer talk about the future of VR, his headset collection, his infectious vision for where this was all going to go. We were still pretty skeptical, but it was just awesome to hear him talk, and we wanted to see more. We wanted to see the demo. So a few weeks later, we met him on July 4th at a hotel in Long Beach. He lives in Long Beach, at the time at his parents' garage. So we meet him at this hotel, and in he walks with this little tub, like the trays under your school desk, dangling wires and circuit boards, and we're looking at it going, okay, this is going to be interesting. He puts it all together and turns it on, and at the time turns out the light, and you had to hold the thing in your hand. It was like a viewfinder. But when you looked through those lenses, you saw this bold new world. You saw this incredible virtual world that was believable. It was a hint of it. It felt like it. It wasn't all there, but it was there enough that it got us excited. We were hooked. We wanted to help. This is something I think happens with everybody who tries VR. You see it, you believe, and then you want to help. You want to get involved. So within days, Oculus was born, the Kickstarter was launched, and the journey had begun. Literally a few weeks after we met Palmer and saw this demo. This happened overnight. None of us expected this to go as fast as it went. Again, it's because of you guys. It's because of the community. It's because everybody rallied together. So most of you know the story from here on out. You're part of the story from here on out. We iterated on the hardware and the prototypes, and you guys bought it. Thank you. Really, without your support, it just wouldn't have happened this fast. So we worked across all these different disciplines. We had to recruit people for hardware, electronics. These are things we had never done before. We're software programmers for the most part, and Palmer's a hardware hacker. We had to get all these incredible disciplines together to make that developer kit really work. What was awesome was everybody was believing. Everybody wanted to sign up and get involved. We were able to recruit one of the most talented engineering teams of all time. I mean, Carmack and Abrash back together again. It's pretty awesome. These are the guys that brought us 3D, and now these are the guys, and this is the team with you guys, the community, that's going to go out and bring virtual reality and change the world. When we finally shipped DK1, I can tell you it wasn't always smooth sailing. We really didn't know how the community would react to this. To be honest, we were pretty terrified. It had its issues. It was kind of like a lunchbox strapped onto your face with 1990s graphics and a whole lot of motion blur. It was early days, that's for sure. But when you used it, you saw the potential. You got excited. Everybody did. YouTube really got excited. Grandma got excited. The community rallied, and VR had a second hope, a second chance. It just hadn't worked before. The timing wasn't right. Hardware wasn't ready. But now it was, and the community was there. But the story wouldn't be complete without mentioning another major contributor. It really is important. This is one of the most important parts of my journey along the way. While we were working on iterating the Rift, getting the developer kit out, scrambling as fast as we could to ship you something, Michael Abrash, Ottman Binstock, and the Valve VR team were hard at work on R&D. They were working on trying to solve the elephant in the room, motion sickness. In September 2013, Abrash called and said, Brendan, we have something I think you're going to want to see. When Abrash calls and says that, you go. I jumped on a plane right away, hopped up to Valve, listened to Abrash, Ottman, and their crew talk about the different challenges and how they were approaching solving them. And it was incredibly fascinating. And it was a little over my head, but I was trying to grab it all at once. We spent a few hours there. It was very exciting. Finally, Abrash and Ottman led me into a room covered with black and white fiducial markers, VR wallpaper. And on the way in, Abrash said, you know, no one's gotten sick yet. I'm curious to see what you think. I said, not even you? And he said, no. And Michael and I are the most sensitive guys out there. Literally a few head turns, and we're out. So I was intrigued, but very skeptical, because it had still been hard for me to experience VR for long periods of time, or even short periods of time, to be honest. So they strapped on this kind of clunky 3D printed headset, circuit boards exposed, dangling wires. It was really reminiscent of Palmer's prototype, but a little bit better. No hot glue or duct tape. Then came this game-changing moment, a moment that I will absolutely never forget. When I knew VR was really going to work, and it was going to work for more than just enthusiasts and nerds like us, like me. It was going to work for the entire world. As I looked around, I felt great. And I felt like I was there. All of a sudden, this switch in the back of my head flipped. Instead of thinking, wow, this is a really neat VR demo, bam, I was in it and I believed I was there. And I started trying to convince myself, wait, no, this isn't real. You're still in that room with those markers on it. After about 10, 20 minutes, I even had to look up at one point and just make sure the world was still out there. It's like, yep, I'm still in that crazy room. Okay. I put it back down and suddenly I was somewhere else. That's the magic of presence. I hadn't felt it before until that moment. And it felt great. I left the room more motivated than ever. I left the room feeling good. Pretty unique. The bar had been set. This was it. This was what we had to deliver for the consumer VR to really work. You had to feel like you were there comfortably. You had to get presence. We continued to work on the hardware, building all kinds of prototypes, ramping up as fast as we could, racing towards this goal. As soon as the prototypes were working, we'd either show them or even, in many cases, ship them out to people. You guys, the community. Let you experiment with them. Give us feedback. We did our best to balance the trade-offs of moving fast without breaking too much. We still broke sometimes. I think one of the best articles was, DK2 is a hot mess, and that's okay. So we apologize for just how hot it is, but we are trying to ship things as fast as we can on this race towards presence. It's really important to get it out to you guys, the community. So to make this work, we needed the best and brightest. We need to ramp up. We need to build a team that could really deliver on this. We couldn't sell VR wallpaper. We couldn't sell this dual-paneled, crazy 3D printed headset. We had to sell something that was lightweight, that felt great, that just needed a single camera or two. Something simple, consumerizable. So along the way, we tried to balance what was the right path for us. How do we achieve this vision and really do VR right? So we decided after a lot of debate internally, and really this was a decision that we didn't take lightly. It was a decision that we felt was the best for the future of VR. I can only imagine what Andy Rubin thought was best for the future of Android. We decided to partner with Facebook. We know this deal created some intense debate in the community. We had some of our biggest followers become our less biggest followers. I think Notch is coming back. Congrats to Microsoft buying. Good job. How ironic. So a lot of you were concerned about what this meant for the future of VR and whether we were going to slow down or change course or what effect this is going to have. Ultimately, it's on us to show you that the Facebook partnership is the right thing for VR and the right thing for Oculus and the community. I can say it's only been 6 months, but since we signed with Facebook, we have supercharged recruiting. We actually used part of our acquisition to go out there and try to entice and incentivize some of the best and brightest to come to Oculus. Michael Abrash joined. That was awesome. Along with over 100 of the top engineers out there. We literally more than doubled our staff with incredible dream team recruits in just 6 months. So far, so good. Again, it's on us. We'll see how this goes. We're trying to do what's right. So what's next for Oculus? That is a big question everybody has. Well, we're really sprinting towards the consumer version. Everything we do is in this pursuit of presence. We need to deliver that experience that we saw in the Valve room. We need to deliver that to everybody that buys an Oculus Rift. You should be completely immersed in this experience. You should believe you're there and you should feel great, even if you're super sensitive like me. But presence is a bit like a house of cards. Without any one component, the whole thing kind of falls apart and comes tumbling down. So how do we get presence right? Let's start by looking at the full chain. This is important. This is how you deliver virtual vision. You have motion of your head, you're moving around. It gets captured by a tracking system, which feeds into the CPU. You have your game engine, your processing, you're running all your algorithms to determine that new position. You're then generating the commands to be sent to the GPU to render the new left and right stereo image that then goes to the display. The display scans out and emits photons that flow through the optics. We finally understand this full path. Had we known what we needed to pull off to really deliver presence in the beginning, we may have never started. Palmer probably would have. I don't know if we would have. It was much harder than we thought. So there's 5 essential ingredients to getting this right. And we try to be as open as we can about these. You've heard some of these talked about in the past. Tracking is one of the most important. You've got to have 6 degrees of freedom tracking. You have to have full head tracking. Everywhere you're moving, those virtual cameras have to be in the same place as your eyes. They have to be there in 360 with sub-millimeter accuracy. They can't jitter. It can't shake around. We have a test internally that we call the tap test. And you're sitting there tapping the headset to see if the image stays perfectly still. It has to. You also need a comfortable volume so you can lean around, lean down. Of course, all sitting down, right? We're always sitting. The other part that you've heard talked about a lot is latency. Latency is very, very important. The latency at every step of the way on that chain has to be as low as possible. Ultimately, to make this work, you need to get to sub 20 milliseconds of latency from motion of you moving your head to the last photon hitting your eye. That's incredibly hard. But if you can get to less than 20 milliseconds, you can actually use the optical tracking fused with the IMU to predict the last 20. Prediction doesn't really work. And you hear a lot of people say, oh, we have prediction and we have 0 milliseconds latency. It doesn't really come together unless you can get down to 20 milliseconds of real latency. Then you can predict the last 20 and you don't get jitter or noise. So minimizing this loop is incredibly hard. But it's actually not good enough. Believe it or not, if you leave an image sitting on your eye for more than just a few milliseconds, it starts to smear across your retina. What you have to do is get the persistence of that image down to just 2 to 3 milliseconds. So either you have 2 options. Either you're running at 300 to 400 frames a second, 300 to 400 hertz display updating, You guys excited about making a 300 to 400 FPS game? I think Carmack is. I know he loves high FPS, but to really get this something that everybody can pull off, the guys at Valve figured out a trick: low persistence. Instead of leaving the display on for 10, 12 milliseconds, 16 milliseconds at 60 hertz, turn it off. Turn it off and only leave it on for 2 to 3 milliseconds. Now the image sits in your eye for a very short amount of time, and then you get black in the headset. And believe it or not, if you can do this fast enough at around 90 hertz, you can get rid of the flicker, and it all comes together. So low persistence is an essential ingredient. It actually ends up requiring some pretty custom hardware along the way. You also need resolution. DK1 resolution, maybe not so great. You need at least 1K by 1K per eye. That's a lot of resolution. You need that in stereo. Left and right image have to be, left and right eye have to be rendered separately. They have to be completely correct. You can't use tricks or you'll perceive them and it won't work. And you can't see the pixels. If you see the pixels, and I am super anal about this, if you see the pixels, it breaks presence. Suddenly you're reminded, oh, I got this thing on my face. I got screens sitting in front of my eyes. If you don't see the pixel structure, you can stay focused on the object out in the world. Finally, you need the optics, that last bit as the display scans out and the photons flow into your eye. You need optics to deliver a wide field of view. If you have a small field of view, it feels like you have a screen in front of you. And your brain just says, oh, I just have this, I'm looking through this Windows screen thing, and the whole effect is lost. If you have an over 90-degree field of view, suddenly you're there. You also need a comfortable eye box. This is something we've wrestled with. Believe it or not, optics have been one of the hardest challenges we're still up against right now. We're still battling optics. The eye box allows you to put on the headset and get comfortable pretty quickly. It also allows you to look around a scene and track an object. If you have an object out in the world, which naturally in the world, as you're moving around and walking around, you're always staring at objects, and then you're moving from one object to the next object. As you're doing that, and yet you're still moving, when you move and you look through, it starts to blur and get distorted. The experience falls apart. Having that wide eye box is really important. Calibration of these optics is incredibly hard. We have somebody at the office, Brant Lewis, who we nicknamed Golden Eye. He sits with the headset and he manually calibrates these things for hours. I can't imagine what it feels like. And it works well, but not quite well enough. You have to do it perfectly. So we've had to invest this huge amount in a system that would actually go out there and capture the screen through the lens and give the exact right distortion model to be corrected. If you don't do it, when you're looking around, you'll see this kind of warpy effect and swimmy effect, and it will not feel good. So all of these things have to come together to deliver presence. These are the 5 core components. When you put these together and you get it right, and you get the content right, and it all pulls together, suddenly you're there. The switch flips, and you're in a new virtual world. Today, I'm excited to show the progress that we've made heading to the Consumer Rift with a new feature prototype, Crescent Bay. It's a beautiful beach, very close to where we're located. This prototype shows off the features, the quality, the presence that we need to deliver for consumer VR. This is along the path, much like Crystal Cove was. This is not the consumer product. It's much closer, but it's not the final thing. It is a massive leap from DK2. It's as big of a leap as we made from DK1 to DK2 as DK2 to Crescent Bay. It is awesome. It has updated display technology, including a higher refresh rate, higher resolution, improved optics. It also has 360-degree tracking. You can see the LEDs on the back. That was not easy. It's still not perfect. None of this is perfect yet, but it is much, much better. It also has improved weight and ergonomics over DK1 and DK2. It is much lighter, thank God. And finally, you'll notice integrated audio. Still optional, integrated audio. You can move them out of the way. Many of you are going to want to use your own earplugs. But audio is a big multiplier for presence. And we're committed to delivering great audio, not just in the hardware, but also in the software. And this is all part of that commitment. But the most important thing about Crescent Bay is that this allows for sustained presence. This allows you to achieve the impossible and believe you're truly in a world comfortably. It's not perfect, but it is a huge step forward. And it is getting much, much closer to consumer Rift. This is still very early hardware and software, but it's in a state that we're ready to show you today. Literally right now, Crescent Bay demos are being set up. I hope they all work. It's a little dicey. It is very, very early, but they are being set up to show you. Please be very careful with them. They are fragile. They were handmade at Oculus HQ just the last few days. I broke one last night, 2 nights ago. They are really delicate, so take them on and off really slowly. But when they work, the magic comes alive. Along with the new hardware, our in-house content team made a set of magical experiences to go along with this new hardware. They're awesome. The experiences are designed to demonstrate the sense of presence, the power of presence. We hope this gives you a glimpse at the future of virtual reality. The next decade is going to be incredible. To see the progress that we've made in just 2 short years to get to a point where we're able to deliver presence is amazing. What is going to happen over the next few decades? I have no idea. It's wild. All of you here are going to be the first to try Crescent Bay at Oculus Connect. Can't wait to see what you think. As I said, Crescent Bay includes audio. Let's come back to that. Audio is very, very important. It's essential to delivering this experience. We're very passionate about it. In fact, Palmer is one of the biggest audiophiles in the office. He has this incredible headphone collection. Not quite as significant as VR headset collection, but it's big. Headphones everywhere. He's got a lot of particulars about what it needs to do. It is going to be awesome. Along with the integrated headphones, we have a huge focus on getting the audio software right, getting 360 VR head-tracked software right. This is something that ultimately we should be able to simulate exactly the sound you expect to hear. The cues have to be right for you to believe it's real. That's hardware and software coming together. As part of this initiative, we've licensed RealSpace 3D's audio technology, a high-fidelity VR audio system developed over 10 years at one of the best universities in the country, University of Maryland. Yeah! Go Terps. Literally today, we are working on audio as aggressively as we're working on the vision side. We have a whole team ramped up. Brian Hook is going to be discussing the unique audio challenges and what we're doing to solve them. 3D audio spatialization, sound design, there's all these different aspects that have to come together. A lot of it is going to come on you guys too. Audio is important. Much more important than it's ever been. So we're going to get it right. We're going to get the vision right. We're going to get the audio right. This is our commitment to you guys. This is our commitment to VR, and this is our commitment to Consumer Rift V1. Now I'd like to welcome Nate Mitchell, Head of Product, to talk about what we're doing on the platform, user experience, and content. Please welcome Nate Mitchell.
Good morning. Thank you, Brendan. How's everyone doing? We're still awake out there? Feeling good? A lot of good stuff to show you guys after this. So Brendan talked a lot about how building the hardware and software that enables great VR is really what we're focused on at Oculus. But that's really only part of the challenge. People need to be able to discover great content, and developers need the tools and systems to reach users around the world. Over the last 2 years, our focus has actually been more on connecting developers with developers, like everyone here in this room. And that initiative really started with Oculus Developer Center and Oculus Share. So as Brendan mentioned, we now have 130,000 developers signed up on the Oculus Developer Center, which is pretty remarkable. And to date, we've seen over 550,000 downloads of the Oculus SDK, which is obviously incredibly exciting for us. The other big piece of that equation has been Share. Share has really grown immensely since we launched it last August. And today, there are over 325 VR games, applications, and experiences available on Share. We're actually seeing new submissions every day, somewhere in the range of 5 to 10, sometimes even 15. What you guys have done in the last 2 years, I mean, we've seen more content built for VR in the last 2 years than we've seen in the last 2 decades. It's remarkable. You guys continue to innovate and trailblaze all across the medium, and it really does inspire us at Oculus. Some of my favorite games up there. An even more ridiculous number is that we've seen nearly 700,000 downloads on Share to date. Pretty ridiculous, especially for a developer site designed for really developers and enthusiasts to share content. Of course, this wasn't at 700,000 when I prepped my keynote. I think it's crossed it by now. But we really are excited by this. And this is really just the beginning. Looking forward, we want to extend Share's core feature set to build out new tools and services that developers can leverage to engage with a much broader audience. These include services like identity, authentication, entitlement, distribution, and perhaps most importantly, monetization. The foundations of the Oculus platform are actually going to be powering the Gear VR device this fall, and we're actually going to be bringing these services to PC in the future. And where other platforms are really solely focused on content distribution, we're constantly thinking about the experiences that you're going to have in VR inside the Oculus platform. As part of that initiative, and some of you may have tried this experience here at the show, when you turn on the Gear VR device and put it on, you actually drop into an experience, a VR experience that we call Oculus Share, or Oculus Home, sorry. Some of you may have tried it here, and Home is designed specifically to let users interact with the Oculus platform in a variety of different ways, all from within VR. We really, really wanted to make this a seamless experience where you can transition between content, find new content, and in the future do even more. Our team is really focused on making Home as comfortable and intuitive as possible so that anyone can dive in and get started exploring the Oculus ecosystem right from the start. Right now, the primary function of Home is absolutely content discovery and acquisition, all within VR. But you're going to see Home grow and evolve over the coming months. With Gear VR, for example, we're expecting to launch with dozens of experiences, all available from within Oculus Home on day one, many of which were built by the developers in this room today. And I want to emphasize that all the systems we're putting together, they're not strictly only for VR. As part of Gear VR's launch, we're also going to be shipping a 2D mobile application, a native mobile app, where users can access the Oculus platform straight from their phone. We also have plans to let users discover and browse content on the web in a portal very similar to Share, but obviously more evolved. And we'll have more news on that in the coming months. Along with Home and the mobile client, we're also shipping 2 VR applications as part of the Oculus platform. These are VR Cinema, Oculus Cinema and Oculus 360, both of which are launching as part of Gear VR. Oh, let me back that up one slide. Or forwards. So, we'll be releasing actually the full source code for Cinema and 360 as part of the mobile SDK to help you guys jumpstart your Gear VR development on the platform. Yeah, we're really excited about this, and this is really just the beginning. So that's a small peek into the Oculus platform and some of the things we've been working on behind the scenes. And again, that's going to come to life first on Gear VR later this year, and then first with Gear VR at launch, and then coming to PC later. In my opinion, one of the absolute best things about the partnership with Samsung is that it lets us bring the Oculus ecosystem and platform to a much, much broader audience much more quickly. And with that in mind, there are a few other partnerships we'd like to highlight today that have really been impactful for Oculus. Epic's Unreal Engine 4 continues to be one of the absolute best engines for developing VR content out there. And that's really because, some applause for Epic. Definitely deserved, yeah. And that's because Epic has dedicated a huge amount of resources into making it incredibly easy to use to build awe-inspiring VR experiences, mostly for the Rift. Most of the Crescent Bay, the first-party Crescent Bay demos that Brendan talked about, are actually built with Unreal Engine 4. It's an incredibly stellar tool set. So almost every major Oculus prototype announcement has been accompanied by a new Unreal Engine demo. It started all the way back at CES 2013 when we showed Epic Citadel, that snowy, flying craziness. It moved on to Elemental VR, and we did Strategy VR, and then Couch Nights. And for each one of these demos that we worked on with the Epic team, they absolutely stole the show. Keeping that streak alive, Epic has put together an entirely new experience for Oculus Connect that they call Showdown. We're really, really excited to be able to share this with you guys today, running on Crescent Bay alongside our own suite of demos. Showdown is hands down the best demo that we've put together with Epic, and at least for me, it's one of the experiences that I'm going to remember forever in VR. I think you guys are going to like it. Another really key partner for us has been Unity. Unity has one of the absolute biggest Oculus developer communities that's active today. When we ran the VR Jam in 2013, we actually saw that about 90% of the 225 games and experiences that were submitted for the final build were all built using Unity. We've always had a major focus on trying to make Unity as accessible as possible for Oculus developers. And today, we're thrilled to announce that we've partnered with Unity to make Oculus an official platform and build target for Unity 5. We know this is something you guys have wanted for a really long time. We're really excited to make it a reality. This also means that Unity will now fully support Oculus and the Rift with a dedicated add-on that includes optimizations to stereo imaging, 3D audio support, and other engine-level and editor-level integrations. But best of all, it means that Oculus will now be supported in both the free and pro versions of Unity for everyone. Yeah. We've seen a huge amount of incredible, groundbreaking content built with Unity and Oculus over the last 2 years. Some of my favorite experiences, like Lucky's Tale, I know the Playful team's in the audience somewhere, Dumpy, Going Elephants, yeah, shout out to Playful, Super Hot. But ultimately, we really hope that this partnership and this step forward really enables more developers to leverage Unity's already super accessible tool set to build the next generation of VR experiences that help define the platform. So with that, I'll bring Brendan back out here. It really is incredible to see all you guys here today, and thank you again for being part of this.
All right, so we're almost done here. We're setting up Crescent Bay as we speak. We're getting it ready for you guys to see. It has these really magical experiences. One surprise that we haven't talked about yet that you'll have to see to believe. And then it ends with Showdown. And Showdown is one of the most incredible experiences out there. It's as close to Call of Duty as I want to get. Things will be whizzing by you. Good luck. This is an incredible time. It's a time where we're all coming together and we're all a part of this. I want to give a big thank you to the Epic team for all of their work on the demos, the Unity team for coming together on this partnership, and NVIDIA for providing all the GPU hardware and making a bit of a surprise announcement that we just heard about on their commitment to VR in their hardware, the advances they're going to make. It really takes everybody coming together. As we say at Oculus, this is a team effort, and you're all part of that team. So you can grab the Oculus Connect mobile app, and you can start registering for your demo, your Crescent Bay demo. Now, as you're registering and this is getting set up, let me remind you that we have a few more speakers coming on. So the suits of the audience can get up and leave and go see the demos while the rest of us stay and listen to none other than Michael Abrash, chief scientist at Oculus and one of the most inspirational geniuses I've ever met. Please welcome Michael Abrash to the stage.
Wow. I could never have imagined anything like this 3 years ago when I started down the path to VR, and it's fantastic. I'm super excited to be talking to you today, so let's dive in and talk about VR, the future, and you. I think we've all had the experience of walking out of a great science fiction movie or finishing a great science fiction book and thinking, why can't real life be like that? So here's an interesting question. What is it that science fiction has that real life doesn't have? To me, it's the sense that the future hinges in important ways on individual actions. Isn't that what we all want? To matter, to make our mark on the world, and to change the future for the better? Consider the three novels that I think of as the touchstones of VR and AR: Snow Crash, Ready Player One, and Rainbow's End. Snow Crash is about the battle over Sumerian biolinguistic viruses, which basically means control of the entire world. Ready Player One is about the battle for control of Oasis, which basically means control of the entire world. And Rainbow's End is about the battle over you gotta believe me mind control, which basically means control of the entire world. And do I even need to mention the Matrix? Of course, none of us are going to wake up tomorrow and find ourselves stopping bullets in midair or kung-fuing with Agent Smith, but we, all of us in this room, are among the most fortunate people on Earth because we have the opportunity right now to change the future in a big way, an opportunity that not one person in 1,000 has in their lifetime. Each of us has been hardworking, smart, and lucky enough to have a front row seat as VR becomes real and to be in a position to help make it real. And you are more critical to making that future happen than you might imagine. Consider John Carmack and the genesis of network 3D gaming. In 1994, John and I had dinner at this Thai restaurant in Bellevue. I knew John was going to offer me a job at id, and I knew I was going to turn it down because I was doing important work on Windows NT at Microsoft. And John did indeed offer me that job. But before he did, he talked for a couple of hours about his vision of the future, in which anyone could build persistent worlds on the internet, and anyone could jump into and between those worlds, and a kind of cyberspace would accrete from the actions of a whole community. By the time he was done, I knew I had to join John to make that happen. And happen it did in a big way, which brings us to the key question. Would it have happened the same way without John? What if John had just churned out more Doom-style games, rather than seeing the potential of the internet for client-server gaming and moving to full 3D? What if he hadn't had a strong philosophy of openness, if he hadn't shared his techniques freely, if he hadn't encouraged modding? Would the world of network 3D gaming have been the same? To me, it's obvious that things would have worked out very differently. If you think otherwise, I'd say you've fallen for what Ottman Binstock calls the myth of technological inevitability. The idea that just because technology is possible, it will just naturally happen. In point of fact, the future depends on the actions of individuals and can follow wildly diverging paths depending on those actions. If John hadn't done Quake, not only gaming, but quite possibly GPUs themselves would have been very different. If Steve Jobs hadn't come back to Apple, who knows what cell phones would be like? And if Palmer Luckey hadn't prototyped the Rift, VR wouldn't be on the verge of taking off, and we wouldn't be gathered here today. But Palmer did do that, and VR is about to happen. You, likewise, have a remarkable opportunity to alter the course of the future. VR is potentially the biggest transformation in our relationship with technology, at least since the personal computer, and possibly much more. It's the completion of a path that started with the invention of language and drawing and continued with writing, printing, telephony, radio, movies, television, and computer games. VR will finally allow us to interact with information in the way we're built to interact with reality. But there is no inevitability to how that happens, how long it takes, or how it alters our lives. VR is coming, but the path it takes depends on the actions of a few thousand key people, potentially including you. That may be hard to believe, but I'm completely serious. Working on VR is probably the closest any of us will ever come to living in a science fiction novel. Having said that, this seems like a good time at which to insert the official most famous VR photo ever. Partly because this happens to be my cousin, Sally Rosenthal. But also to remind ourselves of how often VR has been touted to take off in the past, and how consistently that has failed. Why is it going to be different this time? Let's start with what Chris Anderson called the peace dividend of the smartphone war. Good enough VR requires a sizable number of aspects to be above the bar simultaneously. If even one isn't good enough, the experience just won't come together. These aspects include optics, calibration, ergonomics, rendering, and optical tracking, all of which are tractable for small teams with relatively modest budgets. But there's also a need for small, lightweight, high-resolution screens, along with tiny, accurate, high-frequency gyroscopes and accelerometers, and those are definitely not tractable without very considerable resources. No one has ever been willing to spend billions of dollars to develop those technologies just to find out if there was a VR market. But many companies have been willing to spend that kind of money in order to develop the smartphone market. Similarly, development of GPUs powerful enough to handle the warping needed to correct for fisheye lenses and to handle the heavy rendering demands of VR happened courtesy of the game industry. And tiny, inexpensive cameras were likewise developed for other purposes. The second reason is that consumer VR good enough to be broadly successful is clearly within reach. The DK2 is a big step down that path, but there's a lot more going on right now in both VR and AR, which share a lot of the same technology. Google's working on Glass, Sony's doing Morpheus, Valve's done some great prototyping work, Technical Illusions is doing Cast AR, there are many companies doing cell phone AR, and there have been hints of other major projects that are running dark. These are not isolated or wishful efforts. There's a full-on race to establish the next big platform, be it AR or VR, and a tremendous amount of horsepower is being brought to bear on optics, tracking, and small displays. VR-related technology is driving forward, and it won't be long before we have an existence proof for consumer VR. An existence proof changes everything, something I learned long ago. Back when I worked at Microsoft, I wrote what I think was my third serious software rasterizer. The key code was the texture mapping loop. just a dozen or so instructions that consume something like half the entire time when running a game. Obviously, there was tremendous leverage to removing even one instruction from the loop, so I went over the code again and again until I was sure it was completely optimized. Then, just in case I had missed something, I ran it by my friend David Stafford, a superb optimizer. David said he didn't see anything off the top of his head, but he'd think about it, and he'd let me know. When I got home that evening, there was a message from David saying he had gotten not one, but 2 instructions out of my loop. I called him back, but I couldn't get hold of him, so I started thinking about what he might have done to get those 2 instructions out. Thought about it during dinner, I thought about it while I brushed my teeth, I thought about it when I should have been sleeping. And eventually, I did manage to eliminate 1 instruction from that loop, but I just couldn't get the second one. That bothered me all night, and it bothered me the next day, right up until the moment when I got hold of David, at which point he said, "Oh, by the way, there was a bug in my code." David hadn't figured out how to get even 1 cycle out of the loop, but I had. So think about that for a second. I was sure I had an optimal solution, but just believing that someone had a better solution, even though they actually didn't, enabled me to break through my preconceptions and do something I had thought was impossible. That's how it's going to be for VR. Once great consumer VR is shown to be possible and is shipping in quantity, many companies, both hardware and software, are suddenly going to become believers. Increased competition and investment in VR will result in more innovation and better VR experiences, which will lead to broader uptake, which will lead to more investment, resulting in a virtuous cycle, just as happened with smartphones. All it will take to kick this off is consumer VR hardware good enough to spur widespread adoption, and we're almost there. And then, of course, there is Facebook's $2 billion acquisition of Oculus, which guarantees that VR is going to get the resources and the runway that it needs to prove itself. So VR will have plenty of time and resources, can leverage work done for cell phones and other industries, is right on the verge of being technically good enough, and will kick off a virtuous cycle once it starts to be successful. That answers the question of why VR can be successful this time around, but it doesn't answer the question of what it is about VR that's so compelling that it will be successful. There are many possible places to start that discussion, but I think the best place to begin is with my first meeting with Mark Zuckerberg. To jump right to the punchline, no pun intended, here's how I looked the next day. I should make it clear that while this is in fact how I looked after meeting Mark, Mark had nothing to do with causing this. What's interesting, though, is what did cause it. Here's what I reconstructed after the fact. I'd been waiting for the meeting in a conference room. About 10 minutes before the meeting, I got up, left the room, walked around for a bit, then headed back. The conference room's interior wall consisted of floor-to-ceiling relights, like this, with a door at the end. Deep in thought, I walked toward the door, with the relights passing by on my right. Now, when I say deep in thought, I mean really deep in thought. I wasn't consciously paying any attention to where I was going. That doesn't mean I was wandering randomly, though. Without consciously thinking about it, I had handed navigation over to a simple processor, operating below the conscious level. The instructions for that processor were as follows. Keep walking until you come to the last rectangle on the right that has light coming through it. That will be the door, so turn right. Straightforward enough, and pretty much foolproof. Unless someone had shut the door since I had left, which they had. I walked headfirst into that last relight and bounced, producing a sound a lot like a 180-pound person walking into a glass panel, which mercifully was capable of withstanding a 3-mile-per-hour impact. I think they heard me out on the 101. I quickly learned that Facebook security people are really, really good at first aid. They got the bleeding stopped quickly. I successfully told them what day it was and where I was. And the meeting went ahead without a hitch, although Mark does remind me of it every time I see him. So that's a story I can tell for the rest of my life anytime I need to embarrass myself. But it's also a nice lead-in to the core reason I think VR will actually succeed this time around, which is that VR drives the human perceptual system in the way it's built to be driven. As a result, VR can produce experiences that feel deeply real, And that will result in a fundamental change in the way we interact with technology. The key to this is understanding that while we think our conscious minds experience reality, in truth, they don't interact with reality at all. What they do interact with is a hierarchy of processors that operate at an unconscious level, like the one that steered me into the relay, which then deliver their best guess at what's out there in the real world based on the input they've received. Importantly, this data shows up as things we just know. We believe them at a deep level that's often impossible to override consciously. For instance, try to look at this slide and not see an impossible object, but rather just shapes and lines and edges with no overall structure or meaning. I bet you can't do it, because your visual system is doing that work well below the conscious level. Object identification is already complete by the time the information reaches your conscious mind, and it appears to you as something you just know with such certainty that you don't even have a way to question it. Here's another example that provides experimental evidence of how powerfully unconscious processing creates our sense of reality. Take a moment to figure out which of the on-screen images of these two spheres is larger. To be clear, I'm talking about 2D size, not 3D. To me, and to most people, it's obvious that the farther circle is larger. However, this is a scene with a number of distance cues: forced perspective, distance blur, shadows, lighting, that imply that the farther sphere, considered as an object in a 3D scene, is farther away than it would be without those cues. The farther away it is, the larger its 3D size must be relative to its size on the screen. The brain factors those cues into your perception of size long before the images reach your consciousness. In fact, as you can see here, the two 2D circles are exactly the same size. The surprising finding here is that fMRI studies show that the farther sphere has a larger projection on the visual cortex. That is to say, even in the brain's lowest level model of the image on the retina, the visual system's representation of the farther sphere is already larger than that of the closer one, long before it reaches conscious control. The visual system integrates all of the data available to it and alters the relative sizes, and that is the reality that we experience. We might as well be brains hooked up to wires in glass jars for all that we truly experience reality. Our reality is nothing more or less than the sum of the conclusions reached by a variety of unconscious processors, driven by a body's worth of sensors. Our coherent view of the world emerges from the integration of the outputs of those processors in the lower levels of our brain. That might sound obvious, but because it's perceptual, the only way to truly understand what it implies is to experience it. For me, that experience came standing on a virtual ledge in the Valve demo room. I don't like heights, and to my surprise, my knees locked up and I had the same sense of unease on that ledge as I do looking over the edge of a real cliff. Consciously, I knew I was nowhere near a drop of any kind, but enough of my unconscious processors were convinced so that I had exactly the same reaction as if I had been. I could make myself step off the ledge, but it required a lot of conscious effort, and what I couldn't do was convince my body of what I knew for a fact, which was that I was in no danger. To me, the reality was that I was standing on a ledge, regardless of what my conscious mind thought. This is what the term presence means, that your perceptual system believes the virtual experience at a fundamental level. I'd love to give you a more precise definition, but because presence is a perceptual phenomenon, all I can do is quote Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart and say, I know it when I see it. I'm sure many of you have experienced presence to at least some degree, so you'll understand how powerful it is and why it's so hard to define. And if you haven't experienced it, the Crescent Bay demo today could be an eye-opener. Unfortunately, I can't give each of you the ledge experience right this moment, but I would like to give you an example of how your perceptual system constructs reality for you. So let's take a look at something called the McGurk effect. Here we have a video of someone saying the phoneme bar.
Bar, 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 bar.
Unsurprisingly, what we hear is bar. Now let's make it more interesting. Suppose the sound is of someone saying bar, but the visuals are of someone saying far. What sound do you think we'll hear?
Bar, 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 bar.
Astonishingly, we hear far, a sound which doesn't actually exist. In case you don't believe that the audio is actually far, let's look at another video. As this video plays, move your eyes back and forth between the two halves of the screen. As you do so, you will hear the sound change, even though the only sound in this room is bar.
Bar, 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 bar.
It's impossible to make the case that we're experiencing reality with the McGurk effect, because the sound we hear simply isn't present. Fourier analysis of the audio would really reveal no trace of the sound bar. What's happening here is that the senses, including hearing and vision, are unreliable. So the perceptual system constantly has to make clear judgments from noisy signals. And this is its best guess in this case. The sound we heard in this video was inarguably nothing more or less than a signal from the speech recognition center. No more a reflection of acoustic reality than if it was produced by applying an electrode directly to your brain. The McGurk effect is just one of a long list of visual, auditory, tactile, and kinesthetic illusions that expose the underlying mechanisms of our perceptual system. And it is those mechanisms that construct the reality we experience. If they're driven properly, as they were when I stood on that ledge, they can be made to report any reality we're capable of experiencing. And it is precisely that ability to drive the perceptual system directly that makes VR uniquely powerful and compelling. Of course, it's hard to hear that and not think of the Matrix. Maybe that's somewhere in the far future, but I don't expect anything like that in my lifetime. We don't have anything close to the understanding, let alone the technology, that would be required to make that work. What can now work is understanding the key cues and driving enough parts of the perceptual system from the outside, through the eyes, ears, skin, and so on, to create experiences that induce presence, the sense that you actually are someplace, rather than just looking at a picture of someplace. It's just barely possible right now, but that's enough. Using VR to drive the perceptual system directly is far more revolutionary than it seems. It's not just pasting up bigger and better images like a 360-degree IMAX theater. It's a difference of kind. Traditional media present images and sounds that are descriptions of experiences. Done properly, VR presents experiences directly, in the way that our bodies have evolved to accept information. If I had seen a movie of someone standing on a ledge, that would have been one thing. I would have understood what was going on, I might have had an emotional reaction and so on. But standing on a ledge in virtual reality was another matter entirely, because as far as my unconscious was concerned, it was actually happening to me. Once again, this is a perceptual matter. So it's hard to explain except by putting you in a VR headset, but think of the McGurk effect, where you experienced a sound that didn't exist, and then extrapolate that to full immersion. Or think of it as the difference between showing you this picture and letting a tiger loose in this room. I'm pretty confident I know which of those two events would more fully engage your perceptual system. The bottom line is that VR isn't just another platform, because it's information driving the perceptual system the way it's built to be driven. It's an entirely different and more powerful way to interface with information and computers than we're used to. And in a very real sense, it's the final platform, the one that wraps our senses and will ultimately be able to deliver any experience that we're capable of having. At this point, I hope I've convinced you that VR is potentially a hugely important technology that's about to become widely used. I realize, though, that some of you may be thinking that I've drunk too much of my own Kool-Aid. I'm confident that if you're still a skeptic, that's because you haven't yet experienced real presence. My prediction is that you'll retain that skepticism right up to the day you use a VR system that does induce strong presence for you and have your own ledge experience, and then you'll understand. And the Crescent Bay demo today could make that day. Okay, you may or may not be convinced, but it's my belief that now that VR is technically doable, economically feasible, and capable of driving the human perceptual system convincingly enough to transport you to virtual worlds, in all likelihood, VR will take off in a big way over the upcoming years. So what does that mean for you? In a word, opportunity. This is like when John and I started on Quake, but on steroids. Pretty much everything still needs to be figured out. The killer app for VR hasn't been created yet. You could be the one to come up with it and start the next great genre. Likewise, VR art, animation, and game design are ripe for invention. Even the mechanics of VR have yet to be invented. I remember when John came up with mouse look, and no one knew which way it should move your viewpoint. Strafing, HUDs, movement speeds, everything that had to be figured out for FPSs will have to be figured out again for VR, and much, much more. Consider graphics. Right now, graphics is a mature area featuring steady but incremental improvement. The graph of effort and sophistication in versus perceived result out over time looks something like this. VR is going to do this to that curve. The reason that graphics is going to have to up its game in a hurry is that because VR engages so much more of the perceptual system than a monitor does, it's held to a much higher standard. Parallax, accurate positioning, wide field of view, and stereo vision together provide vastly more information to the perceptual system, which responds very strongly to VR done right, and complains just as strongly about VR that isn't quite right. And the trick is that right now, no one knows what it is that will make VR graphics great, and many of the tried and true rules of screen graphics no longer apply in VR. For example, aliasing is much worse in VR because the aliasing mismatches between the two eyes introduce stereo disparity, which is far more apparent and disturbing than mere jaggies on a screen. This is particularly noticeable with specular highlights. Similarly, faceting is much easier to see, so geometric detail becomes more important. All the more so because tricks used to fake geometric detail often look laughably wrong. Texture maps sometimes work, but sometimes look like painted plywood, and bump map surfaces simply don't look right. What all this means is that we're all going to have to invent new rendering, art, and animation approaches that work well in VR, and rethink tool pipelines, and eventually GPU architectures to match. Graphics is also going to have to up its game because VR's rendering demands are considerable. In order to avoid blur, great VR requires strobe pixel illumination, as Brendan mentioned. Then in order to completely eliminate flicker from strobing, it requires a 90 Hz frame rate in stereo. Effectively about 6 times the rendering rate of current games. What's more, as I'll discuss shortly, those demands ramp up enormously over time. I can summarize VR graphics in 4 words: a lot more everything. We're going to need higher quality graphics, we're going to need more graphics, and we're going to need faster graphics. Hardware and software throughout the pipeline will have to change massively, causing a reevaluation of the techniques that have been worked out so carefully over the last 30 years. For a while, graphics will be the Wild West again, as a slew of experiments get run to figure out the new graphics sweet spots for the VR world. That shouldn't be surprising. It's what happens every time there's a major hardware shift. Many years ago, John noted that when the hardware platform changes, it opens up new opportunities for software, things that were simply not possible before. For example, CD-ROM drives enabled Myst, and the Wii controller enabled Wii Sports. With VR, we're about to make one of those hardware changes in a big way, and we're all going to have a crazy, exciting time over the next few years figuring out what's now possible thanks to the Rift. And it's not going to stop there. Consider how technology enabled the evolution of first-person shooters over time. Fast enough CPUs enabled Wolfenstein 3D. Faster CPUs and peer-to-peer networking enabled Doom. Still faster CPUs and the internet enabled Quake. And ever more powerful GPUs enabled Quake 2 and its successors. VR is going to be like that. Given the right combination of hardware and software, every aspect of VR will improve hugely over time. Of course, the VR platform isn't going to advance on its own. Someone has to make that happen. That someone is Oculus Research. We're putting together a broad mix of researchers, engineers, and programmers to form the first complete, well-funded VR research team in close to 20 years. We have the full backing of Oculus and Facebook for doing the deep, long-term work needed to make VR as good as it can be. Our mission is to keep advancing the VR platform so that you can develop new, great VR experiences on top of it. And we're fully aware that VR is more than just Oculus. We'll be publishing our findings and working with university researchers so the whole VR community can grow and move forward. So let's take a quick look at some of the ways in which we think we and others can make VR much better over time. Bear in mind, though, that this is research. so there are no guarantees. Improving visual quality is the obvious place to start. The Rift DK2's resolution is about a megapixel per eye, spread over a field of view of 100 degrees, which means that the pixel density is very low indeed. Less, in fact, than the original Quake running on a monitor at 320 by 200 resolution. To get the same pixel density per degree as a modern desktop monitor, you'd need more than 50 times as many pixels, something on the order of 8K by 8K per eye. Achieving retinal resolution would require somewhere in the neighborhood of 16K by 16K. And that's with a 100-degree field of view. The full dynamic field of view of the human eye is on the order of 200 by 150 degrees, taking us to something like 32K by 24K resolution per eye. That means that eye tracking will almost certainly be a part of the future of VR. We wouldn't actually draw anything close to 32K by 24K pixels. We take advantage of the steep drop in resolution away from the fovea, the tiny high-resolution area of the retina, to render only as much resolution as the eye can detect. But, of course, we need to know where the fovea was pointed every frame, which means we'll need to integrate eye tracking with new display, optics, GPU, and rendering technology in order to make a truly great VR visual experience possible. We'll also be looking at depth of field. In order to explain this, let me define a couple of terms. The word vergence refers to how the eyes cross to provide stereo vision. The closer the object of interest, the more cross the eyes need to be. Accommodation, on the other hand, refers to how the lens of the eye deforms to allow you to focus at different distances. Most existing head-mounted displays support stereo images that allow for correct vergence, but all head-mounted displays that I'm aware of support only one focal depth for all objects in a scene, usually placing everything at near infinite focal depth. Immersion in a scene in which all objects are accommodated at infinity is not perceptually ideal, because the accommodation and vergence reflexes are linked. The lack of proper depth of field can cause discomfort, can prevent stereo fusion, and may make VR feel subtly less real. There are several possible ways in which this might be addressed, but one thing they all have in common is that they require new hardware and significant changes to the rendering model. Once the visuals are good enough, many other areas take on new importance in VR, including tracking, audio propagation and spatialization, input, user experience, haptics, and perceptual psychology. I wish I had time today to talk about the tremendous potential for all those areas in VR. But one particularly exciting area is scene capture and reconstruction. VR is going to need a great deal of realistic content, and the most promising base for that is deconstructing and reconstructing the real world. Over time, this will evolve to incorporate dynamic elements such as weather, lighting, scraps of paper blowing in the wind, cars, and, of course, people. That brings us to what I think will be the core of VR. Once we have virtual places to be in, we'll want to see ourselves and others in that space. Sensors that can capture the interpersonal cues humans key off of, head pose, eye movement, facial expression, hand gesture, body posture and movement, and then map them onto avatars in real time, will enable social interaction in these virtual spaces. Bell Labs used to talk about enabling any two people on the face of the earth to communicate, a powerful vision that has pretty much come true. Now imagine anyone on the face of the earth being able to be anywhere, with anyone, doing anything, whenever they want. Humans are highly social creatures, and I believe that sharing virtual spaces with other people will ultimately be the most powerful and widely used aspect of VR. VR is about driving the perceptual system. The more of it, the better, so eventually it will involve all the senses: audio, tactile, balance, kinesthetic, maybe even smell and taste. The entire body will become the sensor, not just the eyes, and the display will consist of not just pixels, but of everything that drives perception. VR also includes the other part of the perceptual loop, interaction as well as sensing. So it will include the ability to manipulate the virtual world as well. Over time, VR will wrap more and more of our perceptual system and will truly become a personalized alternate reality. It'll be many years before that transformation is complete, but VR is already changing what is possible, just as new hardware long ago enabled Myst, Doom, and Quake. Soon, there will be VR games, apps, and experiences that will revolutionize the way we interact with information and with each other. We're building the platform, but what those games, apps, and experiences will be is for you to decide. Imagine you had a pair of enchanted goggles that could teleport you to any place you could imagine. Where would you go? What would you do? It's a powerful thought, and that's exactly the magic that VR makes possible. Right now, we're at the very beginning of the VR revolution, and ahead of us lies a long, incredibly exciting time of groundbreaking research and development by smart, talented people, people like you. At Oculus, we're all in on building the VR platform, but that's only part of the picture. It takes a whole community working on top of that platform to make VR happen. This is what it looks like when opportunity knocks. I hope you'll take this rare chance to shape the future and come along on the adventure of a lifetime as we make science fiction real. Thank you. So let me just say that the energy in this room around VR is unbelievable. I never thought I would have a day like this, so it's fantastic. So to get back to the real world, be back here around 11:30 for John Carmack's talk.